Hello, Bobby. I'm Terry Green, your French tutor.
One of these features high school students peeping on girls in shower scenes that would constitute criminal voyeurism under contemporary law. One depicts an abortion with such casualness that test audiences today find it genuinely shocking, and one involves teenage boys creating a woman from a computer specifically to be their sex slave.
I'll bark like a dog for you.
And the film treats this as harmless fantasy rather than as disturbing depiction of objectification. Number 13. Porky's, 1981.
Serious matter.
Bob Clark made this one for Astral Bellevue Pathé and Melvin Simon Productions, with a budget of approximately $4 million, and delivered what became the highest-grossing Canadian film ever made at that time, and also one of the most legally problematic comedies of the decade. The film follows high school boys in 1950s Florida attempting to lose their virginity through increasingly elaborate schemes, including sneaking into a strip club called Porky's and installing peepholes in the girls' shower room at their school. The shower sequence, which is the film's centerpiece, depicts teenage girls showering while teenage boys watch through holes in the wall, and the film presents this as harmless adolescent mischief rather than as criminal sexual voyeurism. What makes Porky's impossible to make today is that contemporary law in most jurisdictions would classify the shower surveillance as creation of child sexual abuse material, given that the characters are explicitly high school students, and filming such a sequence, even with adult actresses playing younger, would violate industry standards around depicting minors in sexual situations. The peephole sequence was controversial even in 1981, with several critics calling it exploitative, but it passed certification boards and the film became a massive commercial success, grossing over $150 million worldwide. The film's humor depends almost entirely on sexual humiliation, particularly of women, with extended sequences devoted to jokes about penis size, premature ejaculation, and female anatomy discussed in the crudest possible terms. The gym teacher character Beulah Bowbricker, played by Nancy Parsons, exists purely to be mocked for her physical appearance and her sexual frustration, and the film's climax involves the boys exposing her to public humiliation during a school board meeting. Contemporary comedy writing standards around punching down and avoiding humor based on body shaming would prevent most of this material from reaching production. The film spawned 2 sequels of diminishing quality and launched a wave of teen sex comedies throughout the 1980s that all followed the same basic template of adolescent boys pursuing sex through schemes that would constitute criminal behavior if actually committed. Bob Clark, who had previously directed the horror film Black Christmas and would later direct A Christmas Story, has given conflicting statements about Porky's in retrospective interviews, at times defending it as capturing authentic adolescent sexuality, and at times acknowledging its content has aged poorly.
Contemptible little pervert who's boundary.
Number 12. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, 1982.
Now, in 1898, Spain owned...
Amy Heckerling directed this one for Universal Pictures, based on Cameron Crowe's book, with a budget of approximately $4.5 million. It's delivered what remains one of the most honest and most uncomfortable depictions of teenage sexuality that mainstream Hollywood produced in the 1980s. Jennifer Jason Leigh plays Stacey Hamilton, a 15-year-old sophomore who loses her virginity to an older man in a dugout, has sex with a classmate who immediately spreads rumors about her, becomes pregnant, and gets an abortion, all presented with matter-of-fact realism that strips away the romantic mythology most teen films employed. Phoebe Cates plays Linda, Stacey's more experienced friend, who provides sexual advice that ranges from practical to disastrous. What makes Fast Times impossible to make today is its extended sexualization of characters explicitly identified as 15 and 16 years old, including the famous pool scene in which Cates emerges from the water in a bikini, while Judge Reinhold's character fantasizes about her. The scene is presented from the adult male perspective, and the character being objectified is explicitly underage, which contemporary standards around depicting minors would prevent regardless of the actress's actual age. The film also depicts Stacey's sexual encounters in ways that emphasize her agency and curiosity, rather than presenting her as victim, which was progressive for 1982, but which contemporary standards would flag as inappropriately sexualizing a minor character. The abortion subplot is handled with remarkable restraint and realism, showing Stacy's decision as difficult but clear, depicting the procedure's emotional and physical impact, and ending with her brother supporting her without judgment or melodrama. That honest depiction of abortion access and abortion as legitimate healthcare option rather than as moral catastrophe is what many critics identified as the film's most valuable element, and what contemporary conservative media organizations would attempt to prevent through boycott and protest if a studio attempted similar treatment today. The film launched careers for nearly everyone involved, including Sean Penn, whose performance as Stone surfer Jeff Spicoli became iconic, despite being a relatively small role and ensemble piece. Heckerling's direction treats the teenage characters with respect unusual for the genre, never mocking them for their inexperience or their mistakes, which is why the film has aged better than most teen comedies of its era, even as specific content has become more rather than less controversial.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Number 11, The Last American Virgin, 1982. Boaz Davidson made this American remake of his own Israeli film, Lemon Popsicle, for Golan Globus Productions, with a budget of approximately $1 million, and delivered what remains the most sexually explicit and most emotionally honest teen sex comedy of the decade. The film follows three high school friends pursuing sex through various schemes, with protagonist Gary, played by Lawrence Monason, obsessed with Karen, played by Diane Franklin. The film depicts oral sex, premature ejaculation, prostitution, venereal disease, pregnancy, and abortion with graphic frankness that pushed R rating to its absolute limit. What makes The Last American Virgin impossible to make today is its graphic depiction of teenagers in sexual situations, including a sequence where the three boys hire a prostitute and all have sex with her in succession, with the film showing enough of the encounters to leave little to imagination while maintaining technical R rating through camera angles and editing. Contemporary standards would classify this as inappropriate sexualization of minor characters, regardless of actors' ages, and the prostitution sequence specifically would be flagged as depicting sex trafficking of what the film implies is an underage sex worker. The film's ending is genuinely devastating and completely unprecedented for teen sex comedy. Gary helps Karen through her pregnancy and abortion after she is abandoned by his friend Rick. He spends all his money supporting her, falls deeper in love with her, and expects she will choose him. Instead, she returns to Rick, who immediately cheated on her and abandoned her when she needed help. The film ends with Gary alone in his car, crying while driving past the party where Karen and Rick are together, and the freeze frame on his face is one of the bleakest conclusions any comedy has ever employed. The abortion sequence is graphic enough that several critics questioned whether the film qualified as comedy, showing Karen's fear and pain during the procedure in ways that emphasize the physical and emotional cost, rather than treating it as simple plot resolution. That unflinching depiction, combined with the film's refusal to punish Karen for her choices, makes it genuinely progressive in ways that transcend its otherwise conventional teen sex comedy framework.
Hi.
Number 10, Losing It, 1983.
I can hardly wait.
Curtis Hanson directed this one for Tijuana Productions and Embassy Pictures with a budget of approximately $7 million, and delivered a film about four teenage boys traveling to Tijuana to lose their virginity that treats crossing international borders to have sex with prostitutes as harmless coming-of-age adventure, rather than as participation in sex trafficking. Tom Cruise plays Woody, one of the four boys, in a role he is rarely discussed in subsequent interviews. The film depicts Tijuana as playground for American teenagers seeking alcohol, prostitutes, and general debauchery unavailable to minors in California. What makes Losing It impossible to make today is its casual depiction of sex tourism and its complete absence of awareness that the Tijuana prostitutes serving American teenagers are victims of trafficking and exploitation, rather than willing participants in adolescent rite of passage. The film presents brothels as comic settings and prostitutes as punchlines, which contemporary understanding of sex work as labor, often performed under coercive circumstances, would recognize as deeply problematic. The power imbalance between American teenagers with money and Mexican women with no alternatives is never acknowledged. The film also includes extended sequences of teenagers purchasing and consuming alcohol in Mexico, driving drunk across the border, and generally treating Mexican law and Mexican people with contempt that the film codes as harmless youthful rebellion rather than as entitled American behavior in foreign country. That casual racism and that assumption that Mexico exists primarily to serve American desires for transgression that would be illegal at home is characteristic of how 1980s comedies depicted border towns. The film was a commercial failure, making only approximately $1.5 million, despite Cruz's rising stardom and Embassy's marketing efforts. Critics found it derivative of earlier teen sex comedies, and audiences had apparently tired of the formula by 1983. Its failure did not prevent subsequent comedies from using similar premises, but it did establish that simply showing teenagers pursuing sex was no longer sufficient to guarantee commercial success without some additional hook or innovation.
Was I supposed to know that she was yours?
Number 9, Private School, 1983.
Never had she wanted a man this much.
Noel Black directed this one for Universal Pictures, with a budget of approximately $3 million, and delivered one of the most gratuitously exploitative films ever released by major studio. Under comedy banner, the film is set at girls' private school and boys' academy across the street, and the plot exists purely as framework for showing young women in various states of undress. Phoebe Cates and Betsy Russell play students at the girls' school who spend the film showering, changing clothes, and being secretly photographed by boys who have installed cameras in their rooms. Matthew Modine and Michael Zorek play the boys who conduct this surveillance. What makes Private School legally impossible today is that it depicts sustained voyeuristic surveillance of characters explicitly identified as high school students, including hidden camera footage of them undressing and showering that the boys watch and share with friends. This would constitute multiple felonies under contemporary revenge porn and voyeurism statutes, and depicting it in film even with adult actresses would violate child protection laws, given the character's explicit minor status. The film presents this surveillance as harmless prank, rather than as serious sexual violation. The film also includes the infamous riding crop sequence in which the school's headmistress conducts inspections while students are showering, using the crop to check posture in scene that is clearly coded as sadomasochistic, despite the school setting and the students' ages. The combination of minor characters and sexualized power dynamics would prevent this sequence from being filmed under contemporary industry standards, regardless of satirical or comedic intent. The film made approximately $11 million domestically, which against its modest budget was profitable, but represented diminishing returns for the teen sex comedy formula. Critics were nearly unanimous in condemning it as exploitative garbage, with Gene Siskel calling it one of the worst films of the year, and questioning why Universal would associate its name with material this crude. The fact that a major studio released it demonstrates how different standards were in 1983 compared to contemporary practices, where similar content would be rejected during development. Number 8, Bachelor Party, 1984.
Hey lady, how much?
Neil Israel directed this one for Aspect Ratio and Twin Continental Films with a budget of approximately $5 million, and delivered Tom Hanks's last truly raunchy comedy before he transitioned to dramatic roles and family-friendly material. Hanks plays Rick Gasco, a bus driver whose friends throw him a bachelor party that involves prostitutes, cocaine, a live donkey show, and escalating chaos that destroys a hotel. The party sequences depict sexual acts and drug use with enough explicit detail that the film barely maintained its R rating and would likely receive NC-17 if submitted today. What makes Bachelor Party impossible to make today is its sustained depiction of prostitution as entertainment and its treatment of sex workers as props for male bonding rather than as people engaged in labor. The film includes a sequence where multiple prostitutes perform for the party guests in ways that would now be recognized as sexual exploitation, filmed for audience titillation under the protection of comedy framing. The film's casualness about drug use, showing cocaine being consumed openly and frequently without consequences, would also violate contemporary studio standards around depicting illegal drug use without clear negative consequences. The donkey show sequence, which implies bestiality as entertainment, is presented as transgressive joke that the characters find shocking, but the film presents without moral condemnation. Contemporary animal welfare standards and general standards of decency would prevent any studio from filming or depicting such content, even in purely comedic context. The film's attitude toward women generally, treating them as either wives who restrict fun or prostitutes who enable it, reflects gender politics that contemporary screenwriting would flag as misogynistic during development. The film was a significant commercial success, grossing over $38 million domestically and establishing Hanks as viable leading man in comedies. His willingness to distance himself from this material in subsequent interviews, rarely discussing it and focusing instead on his dramatic work and his family-friendly comedies, suggests recognition that the content has not aged well, and that association with it could damage his carefully cultivated, wholesome image.
Telling you I am, Joe.
I want women.
I got women.
Number 7. Weird Science, 1985.
Well, that's a very sweet thought of both of you gentlemen, but I really don't see it.
John Hughes wrote and directed this one for Universal Pictures with a budget of approximately $7.5 million and delivered a high-concept comedy about two teenage boys who create a woman using a computer with the explicit premise that she exists to fulfill their desires and teach them to be confident. Anthony Michael Hall and Elan Mitchell Smith play Gary and Wyatt, who use science fiction technology to create Lisa, played by Kelly LeBrock, who emerges as idealized fantasy woman programmed to serve them and solve their social problems. The film presents this as wish fulfillment, rather than as deeply problematic depiction of women as objects to be created for male pleasure. What makes Weird Science impossible to make today is its fundamental premise that women can and should be manufactured to male specifications, that the ideal woman is one who has no desires or agency beyond serving the men who created her, and that this fantasy is harmless adolescent imagination rather than disturbing reflection of how the film views female autonomy. Lisa exists purely to make Gary and Wyatt more confident and more popular with other girls, which means she is a tool for achieving access to real women rather than being treated as person herself. Contemporary understanding of how media shapes attitudes about consent and autonomy would recognize this premise as teaching harmful lessons about gender dynamics. The film includes sequences where Lisa uses magical powers to humiliate the boys' bullies and to throw a party that gets wildly out of control. But even in these moments of apparent power, she is still functioning according to the boys' desires rather than expressing autonomous will. The film never questions whether creating a sentient being to serve your needs might be ethically problematic, instead, treating it as purely technical challenge that science fiction technology has solved. The closest the film comes to examining its premise is when Lisa suggests the boys do not actually need her because they have learned confidence, but this still frames her existence purely in terms of her utility to them. The film was a moderate commercial success, making approximately $38 million domestically, and has maintained devoted cult following through home video and cable television. Hughes's reputation as chronicler of adolescent experience has protected the film from some criticism, with defenders arguing it is fantasy that should not be judged by realistic standards. But the fantasy itself is revealing about cultural attitudes in 1985, and the fact that major studio greenlit film with this premise demonstrates how normalized the objectification of women was in mainstream comedy.
It's purely sexual.
Number 6, Revenge of the Nerds, 1984.
All right, say cheese.
Cheese!
Jeff Kanew directed this one for 20th Century Fox and Interscope Communications, with a budget of approximately $8 million and delivered what became one of the defining comedies of the decade, despite containing a scene that, by any contemporary legal or ethical standard, depicts rape. Robert Carradine plays Lewis, a college nerd who wears a Darth Vader mask to impersonate a jock and has sex with the jock's girlfriend Betty, played by Julie Montgomery, who does not discover the deception until after the encounter is complete. The film presents this as a triumphant moment where Lewis wins the girl through his sexual prowess. and Betty is charmed rather than traumatized by the deception. What makes Revenge of the Nerds impossible to make today is that the mask scene depicts rape by deception, which is legally recognized as sexual assault because Betty could not consent to sex with Lewis when she believed she was consenting to sex with someone else entirely. Contemporary understanding of consent requires that all parties know who they are having sex with, and obtaining sex through deliberate identity deception violates that fundamental requirement. The film not only depicts this assault, but celebrates it as romantic victory, with Betty falling for Lewis based on his technical sexual skill rather than reporting him to authorities or experiencing the trauma that actual victims of such deception experience. The film also includes extensive scenes of nerds installing hidden cameras in the sorority house to watch women undressing and showering, which the film presents as justified revenge against the women who rejected them, rather than as serious criminal violation. That voyeurism subplot would violate contemporary revenge porn statutes and would be recognized as sexual harassment and invasion of privacy, rather than as acceptable retaliation. The film's premise that nerds deserve sexual access to women who have rejected them, and that obtaining that access through deception or surveillance is acceptable, reflects attitudes about male entitlement that contemporary consent education explicitly challenges. The film made over $40 million and spawned multiple sequels. Carradine and Anthony Edwards, who played the lead nerds, have both been asked about the mask scene in retrospective interviews and have given responses ranging from defensive to uncomfortable to genuinely reflective. The film's commercial success demonstrates how normalized rape culture was in 1980s comedy, and its impossible to remake status demonstrates how far cultural understanding of consent has evolved since. Number 5, 16 Candles, 1984.
What's the story? You got a guy or?
Yes, 3 big ones.
John Hughes wrote and directed this one for Universal Pictures, with a budget of approximately $6.5 million, and launched both Molly Ringwald's career and his own decade-long dominance of teen comedy, while also delivering one of the most casually horrifying depictions of sexual assault disguised as romantic comedy subplot that mainstream American cinema produced. The film follows Samantha Baker, played by Ringwald, whose family forgets her 16th birthday, but the disturbing content involves side character Caroline, played by Haviland Morris, who gets extremely drunk at a party and is essentially given by her boyfriend Jake to freshman geek Ted, who puts her unconscious body in a car, and the film implies they have sex while she is too intoxicated to consent. What makes 16 Candles impossible to make today is that it depicts what is unambiguously sexual assault of an incapacitated person and presents it as comedic plot development rather than as crime requiring intervention. Jake tells Ted he can have Caroline because Jake is tired of her. Ted transports Caroline while she is unconscious. The film cuts to the next morning, where Caroline wakes up next to Ted, asks what happened, and Ted implies they had sex. Her response is not horror or violation, but vague positive interest, suggesting she is charmed by the situation. This depicts rape of intoxicated person unable to consent, and then suggests the victim would be grateful rather than traumatized. The Long Duke Dong character, played by Gedde Watanabe, represents a separate set of problems around racial stereotyping. The character is crude Asian caricature played entirely for ethnic comedy, with every scene relying on the audience finding his foreignness inherently ridiculous. His manner of speaking, his behavior, and his portrayal reinforce harmful stereotypes about Asian men. Watanabe himself has spoken about the role with ambivalence. Acknowledging it gave him work, while recognizing it contributed to stereotypes that caused genuine harm to Asian American community. Ringwald herself has written as an adult and mother about revisiting the film and finding elements genuinely disturbing that she did not recognize as problematic when she was a teenager performing in it. Her willingness to engage critically with material that launched her career demonstrates more integrity than nostalgic defenses of the film's supposed innocence. 16 Candles depicts sexual assault and racial stereotyping as acceptable comedy material, which is precisely why contemporary studios would never greenlight similar content regardless of the filmmaker's pedigree.
Who's Jake?
Jake Ryan?
Jake's my boy! Jake is a senior, and he's beautiful and perfect.
Number 4. My Tutor, 1983.
Hello, Bobby. I'm Terry Green, your friend.
George Bowers directed this one for Crown International Pictures with a budget of approximately $1 million and delivered one of the most explicitly predatory films ever marketed as teen sex comedy. The film stars Matt Lattanzi as Bobby Crystal, a high school senior struggling with French who hires a tutor named Terry, played by Karen Kay, who is in her late 20s and who seduces him as part of his education. The film presents this adult woman initiating sexual relationship with teenage student as fantasy fulfillment, rather than as statutory rape and abuse of professional position. What makes My Tutor impossible to make today is its romanticization of what is legally and ethically sexual abuse of minor by adult in position of authority. Regardless of whether Bobby is portrayed as willing participant, he is explicitly underage and Terry is explicitly adult professional hired to teach him, which creates power dynamic that makes genuine consent impossible. The film frames this as liberating sexual education for Bobby, rather than as predatory behavior by Terry, which normalizes adult-teen sexual contact and suggests that teenage boys benefit from being sexually exploited by older women. The film includes extended sex scenes between the adult actress and the actor playing the teenager that are graphic enough to have pushed the R rating to its limit. Contemporary standards around depicting minors in sexual situations, even when performed by adult actors, would prevent these scenes from being filmed as explicitly as the film presents them. The combination of the character's explicit minor status and the graphic nature of the sexual content would likely result in NC-17 rating, or would require substantial cuts that would eliminate the film's primary content. The film's conclusion, in which Bobby passes his French exam and goes off to college presumably more confident because of his sexual relationship with his tutor, presents the statutory rape as having positive outcome rather than recognizing it as violation that would cause psychological harm. Contemporary understanding of how adult-teen sexual contact damages development and creates trauma would recognize this ending as deeply harmful normalization of abuse. The film made modest profit on its tiny budget, but is now almost impossible to view through legitimate channels, with most streaming services refusing to carry it due to its content. Number 3. Screwballs, 1983. Rafal Zelinsky directed this Canadian production for Maurice Smith Productions with a budget of approximately $800,000 and delivered what might be the most single-mindedly focused film about teenage boys attempting to see a girl's breasts ever produced. The entire plot involves 5 high school boys who make a pact to see the breasts of Purity Bush, the most attractive and most prudish girl in school, and the film consists of increasingly elaborate schemes to trick or force her into exposing herself. The film has no other plot, no character development, and no purpose beyond depicting prolonged campaign of sexual harassment, presented as harmless adolescent fun. What makes Screwballs impossible to make today is that contemporary understanding of sexual harassment and consent would recognize the boy's behavior as sustained criminal campaign to violate Purity's bodily autonomy and privacy. The schemes include attempting to drug her, installing cameras in locations where she will undress, creating situations designed to cause her clothing to be removed without her consent, and generally treating her body as public property that they have right to access through trickery. The film never acknowledges this as violation, but instead presents it as appropriate male behavior when confronted with female refusal. The film's climax involves the boys succeeding in exposing Purity during the school's homecoming game in front of the entire student body and community, which the film presents as triumphant conclusion rather than as public sexual humiliation that would constitute sexual assault and would likely cause genuine psychological trauma to the victim. The fact that the film's entire purpose is to build toward this moment of forced public nudity demonstrates how completely it treats women's bodies and women's consent as irrelevant to male desire. The film spawned 2 sequels and found substantial audience on home video throughout the 1980s, which demonstrates that the attitudes it promoted about male sexual entitlement were mainstream enough to be commercially viable. Contemporary audiences viewing it recognize it as a disturbing document of how normalized sexual harassment was in adolescent comedy. And no distributor would touch similar content today, regardless of how it was framed or what period it was set in. The film exists as evidence of cultural attitudes that contemporary consent education and sexual harassment law explicitly reject.
Jesus, I've already moved 9. Hello.
Number 2, Hot Dog, the movie, 1984.
By day, they're the finest hot dogging, freestyles.
Peter Markle directed this one for MGM and United Artists with a budget of approximately $1.5 million and delivered a skiing-themed sex comedy that dedicates substantial runtime to depicting women as sexual objects to be conquered through competitive sport. The film follows freestyle skier Dan O'Callahan, played by Patrick Hauser, as he competes in skiing competition while pursuing various women and engaging in crude sexual behavior. The film theater is structured as a series of skiing sequences, interrupted by sexual encounters with different women who exist purely as conquests, rather than as characters. What makes Hot Dog impossible to make today is its sustained objectification of women, combined with its casual depiction of sexual harassment as normal male behavior. Multiple sequences show the male characters propositioning women aggressively, ignoring rejection, and treating consent as obstacle to overcome, rather than as requirement to respect. One sequence involves a woman being groped in a crowded bar, while the film treats this as comedic rather than as assault. Another involves photographing women without consent in sexual situations and sharing those photographs with friends, which would constitute revenge porn under contemporary statutes. The film also includes substantial female nudity presented purely for male gaze gratification, with women removing clothing for no narrative purpose beyond providing visual spectacle for presumed male audience. The camera lingers on women's bodies in ways that emphasize their status as objects to be looked at, rather than as people participating in the story. Contemporary film criticism and contemporary industry standards around objectification would recognize this as problematic even in clearly commercial contexts. The skiing sequences are actually well filmed and feature impressive stunt work by professional freestyle skiers, which makes the film's reduction of its female characters to sexual objects more rather than less disappointing because it demonstrates the production had resources and talent that could have been deployed toward creating actual characters rather than mere bodies. The film made approximately $20 million, which on its modest budget was substantial success and which encouraged similar films throughout the mid-1980s. The fact that skiing movie required extensive sexual content to be marketed successfully demonstrates how completely the teen sex comedy formula had saturated the market and how normalized objectification had become in sports-adjacent entertainment.
They really take chances.
Number 1, Spring Break, 1983. Sean S. Cunningham directed this one for Columbia Pictures with a budget of approximately $4.5 million and delivered what remains the purest distillation of 1980s spring break culture's casual misogyny, its treatment of women as interchangeable sexual objects, and its celebration of drunken harassment as rite of passage. The film follows 4 college students who travel to Fort Lauderdale for spring break and spend the week pursuing sex, getting drunk, and participating in wet t-shirt contests, while treating every woman they encounter as potential conquest, whose refusal is simply obstacle requiring different approach. What makes spring break impossible to make today is its complete absence of any acknowledgement that women are people rather than prizes to be won through persistence or alcohol. The film includes extended sequences of men aggressively pursuing women who have clearly said no, with the film treating this persistence as romantic rather than as harassment. Multiple scenes show women being pressured to drink more alcohol specifically to make them more sexually available, which contemporary audiences would recognize as depicting predatory behavior designed to incapacitate targets. The wet t-shirt contest sequences, while consensual in that women enter them voluntarily, are filmed in ways that emphasize pure objectification, with camera focusing exclusively on bodies rather than on faces or personalities. The film's depiction of spring break culture as consequence-free zone, where normal rules about consent and respect do not apply, contributed to real-world spring break culture that caused genuine harm to participants, particularly women who were assaulted or harassed while intoxicated. The film presents Fort Lauderdale as playground, where college students can behave however they want without consequences, which normalizes exactly the kind of behavior that universities and law enforcement now actively work to prevent. Through education about consent and through increased security presence at spring break destinations, the film made approximately $17 million domestically, which was considered substantial success and which proved that spring break setting could be commercially viable despite minimal plot or character development. The film's legacy is primarily negative, cited by researchers studying how media representation normalizes sexual harassment and by advocates working to change spring break culture into something safer and more respectful. No contemporary studio would make spring break because cultural understanding of consent has evolved to recognize that depicting harassment as harmless fun contributes to environments where actual harassment flourishes. And because the commercial appeal of pure objectification has diminished as audiences have become more sophisticated about gender dynamics and media literacy. These 13 films depicted sexual assault as romance, voyeurism as harmless pranks, and harassment as acceptable male behavior. They made hundreds of millions of dollars and shaped a generation's understanding of consent and gender dynamics. Contemporary standards recognize what audiences in the 80s accepted. This content normalizes harm. The fact these films can't be remade represents genuine cultural progress.